So we are on time. That is great. We will come now to our last program item for this morning before we will have your well-deserved lunch break. So the next 30 minutes will be about the unexploited potentials in Europe when it comes to realizing promising ideas in finance due to the lacking access to later stage investments. I think we all heard it that European is maybe not yet the place to be to get the necessary, the well-needed investments. We have some, I think, maybe nice funding programs in place, but it could be better. How bad and how good the situation actually is in Europe, that is actually the key focus point for the next panel. And for that, I would like to invite Gustav Spät, who turns around now. Please come to the stage, because he will moderate the next session and will try actually to answer all these questions. So I will leave the stage to you now. And enjoy this discussion.
Thank you, Sabrina. Yeah, my name is Gustav. I work for Bitkom and I'm responsible for the insurance and insurtech topics there. And I'm really glad that we have this panel. And Sabrina, you mentioned it right. It's all about VC today. And the title is Put the Money Where Your Ideas. And I think we have a great panel in front of us. We will talk about, Europe is full of potential when it comes to realizing promising finance ideas. And yet, the later stage investments are heavily reliant on money from outside of Europe. So we had the Israeli guests right now. Maybe we can talk about that as well. Let's have a look behind the curtain and see what classic and innovative forms of financing ideas are out there. And without further ado, I want to introduce you to our speakers for this final panel before the lunch break. And I'm really happy that we have Becker here today. He's the CEO and co-founder of Rinke, which is a digital funding marketplace for companies of the subscription economy. Next, we have Chris Heyer. Welcome to the stage. CIO of the Hypoport SE, which is the strategy and management holding within the Hypoport group. Since 2021, Hypoport is also listed in the MDAX, if I'm informed correctly. Then next on stage, Nina Rinke, investor from Earlybird. Please have a seat. You focus on early stage investments and fin and insurtech especially, and you also gained first-hand startup experience already. Maybe I think it's quite useful for this panel. And then last but not least, Fabian Wesemann. We already had the pleasure to meet you today morning for the welcome remarks. CFO and co-founder of wefox next to his role as board member of Bitkom. So first, maybe let's talk about the different kinds of venture capital we have out there. And I want to ask Paul first. Paul, what kind of venture capital Rinke provides? I mean, it's a really interesting business model. So how does it work? And especially for which kind of company is it suitable?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I would say Rinke does not provide something like venture capital, but more capital for tech companies, younger tech companies in particular. Maybe the word most of you have read somewhere in the media is revenue-based financing or non-dilutive capital. The older word would be receivables-based financing. That's something we know for several decades already. But to put it simply, we offer a financing solution specifically for subscription companies that have recurring revenue. So let's say you have a customer that pays on a monthly basis 100 euros, and then from Rinke you can get the annual contract value, so 1,200 euros on day one at a discount, and you can use that cash instantly instead of waiting for a whole year for the cash to arrive, and use it for working capital, for marketing expenses, for all of that stuff.
Thank you. Paul, next, Chris, next to you, I saw a post on LinkedIn in which you said there are things money can't buy. So what kind of companies does Hypoport actually looks after, and with what kind of funding are you providing support? So is it just the money, or do you focus also on different things?
Great question. Für alles andere gibt es Mastercard, genau. Hypoport, maybe to give you a brief background about Hypoport. Hypoport is one of the first fintechs in Germany. So as you already mentioned, it's a listed company, and we believe in the startup ecosystem as an innovation driver. So we do not focus just on the cash. We focus on partnerships. So we believe, as you mentioned, there are things money can't buy. It's, for example, the expertise, product development experience, the customer access we did develop over the last 20 years. For example, one of our subsidiaries have over 950 bank partners, insurance partners on the platform. So this is something what we will throw in the partnership and try to establish a long-term strategic partnership. And next to this, we do strategic investments in innovation fields and potential partnerships in the early stage area. This is what we do.
So I hear the word partnership. So it's really a partner-based approach, and you're working together.
Yes, I do have some experience when it comes to corporate venture capital. I used to be an innovation consultant, and I have seen that a lot of corporate venture capital funds or corporates did not succeed with their approach to play in the field of venture capital because of several reasons, but most of or the major reason was always like we do invest and we want to partner with you, and then the startup waited a couple of years for the partnership, never happened, and then the startup do have a strategic investor at the cap table, and basically, that's one of the biggest mistakes what they can do in the early stage when they are not worth it, right? So we changed this process. We said we want to establish a lot of partnerships with early stage startups and later stage startups, and want to do some strategic investments where we delivered our assets, where we proved that we are worth it, right? So that's basically it.
Thank you very much, Chris. Nina, what is your focus area for investments? Do you have a focus area actually at Earlybird?
Yes, good question. So we are a classy institutional investor. So we are one of the first ones that came up in Europe in the 90s. We now grew into a team of 70 people investing in early stage, so pre-seed to Series A. And we don't have a very specific focus, but we have done a lot in both fintech and enterprise software, with two very prominent companies, N26 and UiPath, that we backed in the seed stage. And yeah, so that are our core areas, I'd say, but we are pretty flexible. So any idea you have, we'd like to look at it.
That sounds great, that everybody can show up at your door to get money. Fabian, you have experience, of course, with getting money and getting funding with wefox, but maybe as a private person also, do you have something you're looking after, especially when you invest?
Yeah, so I make it easy. So generally, I'm also open, because for me, the biggest and most important quality is that I'm looking at the team and say, are they ready to eat shit? And if I have the opinion that they're ready to eat shit, then for me, it's a relevant thing to look at, because a founding journey means that you are going to be faced with so many obstacles over several years, right? It's not like that you do it for a year or two, but if you want to build something gigantic and if you want to build something big, then you have to have the skill of persistence. You need to be courageous, what we spoke about this morning, right? And you need to be a person that knows that at the end everything will be okay, right? And if it's not okay, it's not the end, right? And so I had yesterday also an interesting pitch, right, from Spät. How do you say that? Yeah, this guy, right? Yeah. So he definitely, you could feel the energy, right, and the passion that goes into it. Plus also that he's ready to eat shit. So that's something that is interesting.
Yeah, I also had the pleasure to listen to the pitch yesterday evening, and yeah, I also felt the emotions coming with it. A question for all of you: how active shall an investor be with regard to strategic and operative goals of a venture? So, if I mean, Chris, you were talking about partnerships. Paul, I'm not sure how is it. What's your opinion on that?
I think first of all, an investor should be clear about his or her approach towards that question. And there is a place for investors who are, let's say, less operationally involved. One of the most famous ones of the last year might be Tiger Global. And then there are others. Maybe Andresen Horowitz is a famous one that promoted the active, supportive investor quite some years ago, who pursues another approach. And I think both are fair approaches, and it really depends on your personal preferences and also what types of founders or companies you want to back, and also the stages you are focusing on. So to give you one example, for us, when we were looking for financing ourselves, it was a difference at the pre-seed stage compared to the seed stage, and it will be a different thing at the Series A stage again. And I don't think there is like one answer to that. It's more important that you're very clear about that.
So would the others also agree that it's a thing on in which stage of development a venture is?
Yeah, so I think generally investors, right, depends on what kind of operational experience they have themselves, right? Because generally investors get scared if they hear something is negative. So you need to understand what kind of investor you have in front of you. If you have an investor with strong operational experience, I think you can be much more open around things and share your issues. If you have an investor that doesn't have themselves too much operational experience, right, and they hear something is going wrong, then like, oh no, what? Something is going wrong? Oh, everything is going to go to shit. And you're like, well, look, as an operator, right, you know every day there's things going to shit, right? But some investors can cope with it and understand, right, that it's normal and that's part of the game. Other investors get scared from it and then potentially not reinvest. So I think from an operating point of view, you really need to understand who you have in front of you. And over time then, right, so I mean, we are by now growing a little bit bigger. We generated last year 350 million in revenue. This year on track to generate 700 million in revenue, right? So we are a digital insurance player. We have a tech-enabled sales force of people who are selling third-party and also our own insurance products, right? And we've been able now to win people to the board that are independent, right? So people who have been in in other board positions before, have been kind of from the industry. And these people might come with a different level of calm, right? And so they understand that things just happen. They are a bit more independent. And obviously that's what you can also share much more open around your issues, right? So generally for investors, I'd say it's important that, right, they create this area of trust.
I would slightly disagree because I also I fully agree with you that the relationship is even more important if something is not going in the right direction and you need the support. So, but it's also a question of mindset and I think experience as an investor. So when looking at my team, some of the partners have an experience of 25 years now. So they have seen a lot. They've gone through crisis themselves and they have seen kind of companies struggling that then picked up traction. So I think it's really about the mindset of an investor and also the trust relationship the investor wants to build. And we have a strong belief that it is super important to be called up once something is happening badly. So I think that's our core mindset. And that's also why we always come in as a team of 2 people, try to meet the founders for half a year or a year even before investing, and really have that relationship built first.
Anything to add?
I would just like to add, it's a little bit like a coaching approach, right? So sometimes, for example, I'm sitting at a board, an early stage startup, and now with all the news out there, of course, they are a little bit afraid. They want to raise in the next 12 to 18 months. And do they have to cut the costs, etc.? So, but I don't want to take the decisions. I want to coach them to take the decisions, right? So I want to enable them, to empower them. So it's a little bit you have to change the perspective sometimes. This is the only thing I would like to add. It's like leadership today. You don't want to take the decisions. You want to be the leader. You want to help the people to grow, to take their own decisions.
For me personally, that sounds like a healthy approach. And let's continue maybe and take a broader look more on the landscape of VC also outside of Europe. Maybe Nina, Earlybird has, I think, 2 billion euros in assets under management. That sounds like big numbers, but also we heard it yesterday evening from Ramin that if VCs need a lot of money, they need to go to the USA or to Asia. So Europe is still lagging behind regarding financing volumes. What has to change to catch up? And is this part of your mission at Earlybird as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have our primary focus also on the early stage, and that's I think what a lot of German and European VCs still have. So there's a lot of capital in the early stage, and we are competing for deals. So we are trying to get into some and not getting into it. So there's a lot of capital there. But when it comes to the growth stages, it's a bit less European money, so people do raise their capital mostly in the US or Asia, as you say. And I think that's a pity. So we should definitely have more growth funds out there. At Earlybird, we do have a growth opportunity fund, so we are able to be lifecycle investors and also back our companies throughout all stages. But also there, we are still dependent on external investors coming in the rounds. And I think, it's just the ecosystem maturing and more growth funds being raised here.
But what has to change? Do we need more courage among the VCs?
More regulation.
More money from LPs, I guess. So more pension funds, more liquidity of
insurance companies should be able to invest as a LP. I mean, Signal Iduna is one of the first insurance companies to establish their own venture fund. That's really crazy. GKV, gesetzliche Insurance. So what is it? What's the word? Gesetzliche Krankenkasse. Public health insurance are not allowed to invest in startups. I mean, they are managing the biggest amount of money one of the biggest amounts of money in Germany. I mean, money will drive innovation. That's it.
And I think it's not about just corporate venture capital, but really investing in funds.
In funds, as a LP, not just corporate, because history shows that's not always the best approach, yes.
Paul, you raised your mic.
Yeah, I just want to get to one point you mentioned, which is quite important in my view. Even if you talk to a German VC or a European-based VC, it doesn't mean that their LPs actually come from here. That's quite an important thing to keep in mind. So if you look at the whole value chain, the problem is even worse than that. But generally, I would agree to what Nina said. At the earlier stages, I think the ecosystem is way stronger than it was like 10 years ago or so. But if you look at the later stages, it's quite of normal to look elsewhere. And even for us, I mean, we just raised a seed round and we just have one German VC and a total of 4. And the other 3 are not from Germany, but from UK, from Israel, or elsewhere. And that kind of shows that you need to look somewhere else. Another point I'd like to add is I think we do need more later stage growth equity investors, but that's not everything. And kind of also our mission at Recap, that equity is not the solution for every financing problem, right? And many tech companies actually do lack access to the wealth of financing instruments that was invented sometime in the past and are forced to just stick to equity. And I think debt solutions are another area that is still very underdeveloped.
Yeah, so I think from a company perspective, and for me, there's so much capital out there that for me, it doesn't really matter whether the capital is coming from Germany, from the US, for Asia. So I don't mind, right? There is enough capital. Let's see what the world will bring over the next 1-2 years, but there is enough capital. I think it's more around ecosystems and what do we do, right? So I think it starts with founders that have built a company reinvesting into the ecosystem, right? That's what brings up more companies. That's what maybe allows people to, learn a little bit from each other. And then obviously it's about, right, if at later stages, then people from different parts of the world are investing, then that just means that a big portion of the gains will be brought somewhere else that maybe will be reinvested into this ecosystem, but also maybe in a completely different one, right? So it's generally just about do we have the power and the courage then to want to build this ecosystem, because that's not something that will have a direct impact, in my opinion, in 1 or 2 years, but that's more the effect of how it will look like in Germany in 10 to 20 years.
So you're basically saying it's the wrong question to ask yourself who the shareholders are of later stage. Because, that's what you read a lot, that all the innovation, all the value that is created, maybe even locally here, is ultimately in the hands of investors sitting elsewhere. And you think that's the wrong question to ask?
For me, it's not. I think the value and the IP and so on sits always with the companies. So that's not. I feel more that's about where will the money flow next, right? So money flows extremely global at the moment, right? And so if Tiger Global is the investor, then they might reinvest in Europe again. But now probably they've maybe been a bit too aggressive last year. So maybe they, take some of the gains back and rather invest in the US, right? And that's like a lost opportunity for Germany and for Europe to would have been the investor who would have made the gains to then can reinvest again, so that more and more great players are not coming from the US, but from Europe.
You mentioned the global perspective now, and let's turn to the global crisis going on and what's the impact of that on the VC and on companies seeking money. Is there a general impact? Is there a different impact for small firms and for larger firms? Do you have a feeling for this or already experience?
Yeah, I think it's quite obvious that the closer you are to the public markets, the more likely it is that you feel some impact, because the public markets already felt the impact, right? And I think broadly everybody would agree that early stage investing at pre-seed or seed stage is, at least as of now, not really affected, and rounds are still being closed, maybe at a slightly slower pace, but in my view, it actually looks more healthy than what we've seen in the last year. Nobody can tell me that raising equity rounds and expecting investors to deliver term sheets after a first call in 2 days is like a healthy environment. So I feel actually quite good about that change back to normal. But how this will evolve over the next couple of months, it's hard to estimate. I can just say from my personal view, I'm not that happy about every investor being vocal and sharing their thoughts in freely available PDFs to the whole audience, and my LinkedIn feed being full of negative vibes. I'm not sure if that really helps ultimately. But on the other hand, it's maybe not the time to just invest all the money you might have raised in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I fully agree to that. So we don't see it yet in the early stage so much. It's slowing down a bit, maybe to the level of 2019, but not really crisis mode. That might change once the funds are not being raised again. And I think a lot of people just want to be prepared and find a strategy. But I agree with you. I wouldn't kind of try to get in panic mode because as of now, I think for the next 2 to 3 years, most of the funds are fully raised. And if you can then show performance and traction, it will be fine.
I'm curious about the fundraising of the funds at the moment.
Same here. We're not in fundraising, so that's good.
But I do know a couple of funds are in the fund or starting fundraising at the moment. But on the other hand, I think every risk is an opportunity, and maybe you can go out with the story buying the dip at the moment, right? So, in every crisis, the best companies will survive. So and maybe it's more an alignment of the hype and the dip over the next couple of months.
And just to add, there are also some advantages like access to talent and some other things that are better in those times, right?
Yeah, how many people are now on the market because of English word of entlassen? Unemployed, fired. Yeah. Or didn't fired? Unemployed because of all the tech companies now in the German market. So it's a really great opportunity for startups and other companies and corporates maybe too.
I think from a company's perspective, again, I think that now is a time that we as operators, as companies, need to bring positive news, right? Because investors are like a swarm of fishes, right? They all swim in the same direction, so if obviously everyone says, "Oh, it's going to be a recession," then that's the outlook, right? And that's what everyone says. And there's going to be a few courageous people who still going to be able to, analyze company by company and say, this is an amazing company. And this is this is the company that's going to be the winner. That's why I agree, right? It's an opportunity rather. But, we need in order to break this, because you only need a few things, right? Because when Corona started, for the first months, the funding market was completely closed, right? There was no chance to get any funding at all. A month later, everyone realized, oh no, actually it's a huge opportunity, and the craziness started. So obviously now it's a different situation, right? But I think we also need a couple of strong up rounds that are happening that can break this entire cycle and bring it back on the right track.
Fabian, one more question for you. We have heard a lot now. And do you have useful tips for startups and which mistakes to avoid also? I think we have a lot of young companies here as well, and also startups. What can you give them?
So generally be very fast, but while being very fast, try to not be too fast. Yeah. So I think that's the best advice that I can give. It's generally about, right, not slowing things down. It's about moving things forward. But at the same time, really considering what you're doing, right? And sometimes also not just run into all directions, but slow a little bit down.
So then I would already start with the last round of questions, and let's try to stay a bit brief and clear in the statements. What is at stake for our ecosystem in Europe if Europe will not catch up regarding the funding market and the VC volumes?
Sorry, I missed the first word.
What is at stake for our ecosystem if we will not catch up compared to other markets in the world?
Time is up.
Out of time.
Who wants to start? Or do you have, I'm sure you have strong opinions on that.
I think, it kind of comes back to the question I also asked Fabian. I personally think what is at stake is just the next wave of innovation that happens outside of Europe. I mean, it's clear to see if you look at the large tech companies of our current time, Apple and so on, none of them is based over here. And I think we are already about to lose the next wave of innovation again. I've read an interesting, I'm not that much into the whole crypto world, so I try to be brief, but I read one article on that where the author basically said the EU is now trying to be the leader in regulating crypto, which is like a joke. Look what we do right now with DSGVO and so on. It's again, we need to regulate all that stuff because we don't have anything over here. And we are about to see that happening in the next wave of innovation again. And I think that's pretty much what's at stake, not being the leader, but just the follower and trying to not lose the wheel completely.
Yeah, so I would agree, right? So it's generally about where's the next Google going to come from, right? Is it from Europe somewhere or is it from the US? And obviously, we want to make sure with wefox, but then also with other companies that we're supporting, right, that this next player is coming from Europe. We believe we have a huge chance at the moment. So there is, in my opinion, also positive effects coming from regulation, right? So it could actually help to set certain standards and certain boundaries because that makes it easier to understand which direction you can go and which you cannot go. So I wouldn't say that it's only negative, but obviously we need to make sure that, the global tech players are not purely US based anymore.
Yeah, nothing to add, just maybe that we see this already, right? So the ecosystem is maturing, a lot of more companies are being founded here, and people think very big. So I see the potential that we don't miss this wave.
I think we have an opportunity to lead the B2B phase over the next couple of years, because of the German Mittelstand. We do have a lot of B2B companies, and this is a big chance for Germany and for you. So
then let's finish with this optimistic thinking here that we still have a chance in Europe and in Germany to catch up as well compared to other parts of the world. And I think we are all ready for lunch now. Sabrina is nodding. So thank you, Fabian. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chris. And thank you very much, Nina, as well. I really enjoyed our panel here. I hope you too. And let's get some food now.